gives me love, 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 crazy loving. She gives me love, 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 crazy love. When I'm watching Breakfast with Bob and Paul.
She said yes, Pancho. She said yes.
Yeehaw, about time.
Welcome back to Breakfast from Kona. My name is Bob Babbitt. His name is Paul. We're presented by Active, #Inspired to Race. And we're brought to you by Timex, Rudy Project, GoPro. We have our second camera, GoPro 4 right there. MPA Graphics, Lava Magazine, and Babbittville Radio. Our next guest, the 4-time Ironman World Champion. Undefeated, 13 iron distance races in her career.
And record holder.
And, yes, 8:18, 2:44 marathon at Challenge Roth. Chrissie Wellington. How the heck are you? There we go.
Yeah,
Studio
exactly.
audience, yes.
Give it up.
Love that. Besides getting engaged to Pancho Man, what you been up to?
No, that's been the highlight of my year so far, actually. Nothing. Everything pales into comparison. Insignificance compared to that.
What have you been up to? You've been traveling the world. You were very instrumental, right, in getting women into the Tour de France for the first time with that with the women's group. What have you been up to?
Yeah, this year has been really busy. I feel like I should be in the circus juggling 100 different balls at the same time. But it's been really, really gratifying and fulfilling in many different ways.
Yeah.
One of the highlights this year was actually being successful in our campaign to get a women's race at the Tour, together with Marianne Vos, Emma Pooley, and Catherine Bertine. We lobbied quite hard for that and worked then with ASO, the organisers of the Tour, to get a one-day race on the Champs-Élysées on the final day of the Tour. So that was a huge success, and I was actually standing on the start line on the 27th of July. And I felt what was akin to winning this race.
Really?
And I didn't think I'd come close to the kind of emotions that I've ever felt winning Ironman races. But the satisfaction that I got from the part we played in enabling the women to have that opportunity was incredibly satisfying, actually. And I think, the four of us took quiet pride in what we'd managed to achieve. It's not a panacea, but it's a start, and I think an important start, and builds on, the progress that's been made over the past few years in women's cycling.
That's amazing to hear. I think a lot of athletes who have been, a lot of professional athletes in our sport are so consumed by the seasons of training and racing and having goals that when you're done with the sport, there's a pretty gaping hole in your life. And to hear you say that you felt that same sort of satisfaction, have you feel like you've been able to fill up a lot of that void, since, and I'm sure it took a while, I'm sure it wasn't overnight?
Retirement is a really interesting process. It's not always easy. We are absolutely blessed as athletes, amateur or professional, to be able to race. It's an absolute honor to be able to race. And I made that conscious decision to retire, but I knew that process of transition wasn't going to be easy, and it's not easy, psychologically, physically. It's definitely challenging, but that was part of the reason I think I needed to do it, for the challenge of actually tackling some of the issues that I then faced.
Yeah.
When you retire, you don't have the structure, you don't have the regimen, you don't have the goal. And in some respects, like you said, you have a void. And the important thing, I think, first is to be really kind to yourself and realize that you are so much more than an athlete. You're so much more than the person that you were as an athlete, and that you have skills and abilities and qualities that go beyond you and your performance. Although, it's a really important part of who I am and always will be, I had to remember that there was more to my life than my achievements as an Ironman athlete. But it does take time to fill that void and to find things that give you satisfaction and fulfillment and a sense of achievement that training for Ironman gave me almost every day.
Is it gotten easier coming back here after the last win in 2011, which was such a dramatic win, to be injured beforehand, to coming here not sure if you could even swim, not sure if you'd be able to get through the day, but finishing that race and walking away from the sport. Coming back in 2012, I'm guessing you still are a tad connected to the event. Now it's a couple of years after that. Is it easier to come back and not feel that I want to be part of this?
It's definitely easier with each passing year. 2012 and even in some respects last year were emotionally quite difficult. And I think much is tied into developing yourself as a person that goes beyond you as an athlete. And I think in the first couple of years, I hadn't managed to do that. I hadn't managed to do that internally.
Right.
And I think this year, finally, I've been involved in a number of different projects and initiatives that have meant that I've been able to carve out this new life for myself that is really, really satisfying and fulfilling, and means that I don't yearn as much for the life that I once had, and all the amazing things that came with it. So I'm really, really enjoying being back. I say that hand on heart. I love being back. It brings back amazing memories, but I don't wish I was
doing
racing.
this again, yeah.
And that's a nice place to be.
Yeah.
Because that means that the challenge that I set myself to deal with that process of retirement, I'm managing to achieve in a small way each year. I felt a little bit like Ironman was in my emotional comfort zone. You know, I'm very routine driven. I'm very, very structured. I loved having a goal. I was successful at it. I was good at it. So in some ways, it was my comfort zone. So to be away from that is actually quite disconcerting. And so dealing with that was a huge challenge. And I do think that more assistance, help needs to be given to athletes in order to enable them to better make that transition while they're still athletes, you know, because
to prepare them for it,
to enable them to develop some of the skills that they need, or be able to articulate the skills that they already have, so that transition is not as difficult.
Yeah.
And I think the national governing bodies or sports agents, even sponsors, can help athletes in making that transition. And just from speaking to different people that have been through that process, I do think that there's still a gap in that regard that may need to be filled.
I got to meet Catherine Bertine a couple years ago at a mountain bike event that we hosted in Utah, where we didn't only have trophy girls for the award winners, the male award winners, but we had trophy boys for the women's winners, and I think she really appreciated that. But talk a little bit about
Were you
your
a trophy
role.
boy, by the
No,
way?
I definitely was not, Bob. We actually had good-looking football players from SUU. But last year at the Tour of Utah, I noticed that there was a women's component to that stage race. And last year, as we just talked about, there was a women's component to the Tour de France. I think a lot of these initiatives have been, in large part, moved forward by you and Catherine and some of these other women. Talk a little bit about some of the other work you all are doing and some of the things you're pushing for on the women's side in endurance sports. Maybe sports in general.
Yeah, I mean, I've always been absolutely passionate about development in many different forms. And when I retired from sport, I wanted to combine my two passions, which are development and sport. And I'm particularly passionate about getting more women and girls involved in physical activity in the broadest sense. So not just triathlon, not just cycling, but physical activity. And coupled with that, also physical activity for children is also an interest and a passion of mine. So when I retired, I just started doing a lot more thinking, a lot more of my own personal research into some of the barriers that people faced in getting involved in sport. And some of the barriers that people face getting involved in triathlon and then in cycling. And I'd met Catherine many, many years ago, and I also knew Emma Pooley, and we just started a dialogue about this issue, and particularly the challenges that faced women in professional cycling. And that's not to say there are not challenges within triathlon, but it became increasingly apparent that there was a disparity in the opportunities that were provided to women in getting involved in cycling at all levels, at the grassroots level all the way up to the professional level, and of course they're intrinsically linked. So we set about trying to find ways to overcome some of the barriers to participation and some of the inequality, the entrenched kind of structural inequalities that existed in cycling. And one of the ways, not the only way, but one of the ways was to lobby for increased opportunities for women to race professionally. And as you said, right now, at the professional level, there are increasingly more races that are adding women's races to the men's calendar. There are also women's races that are standalone events. But we just saw the Tour de France as the pinnacle of, of global cycling.
No question.
Absolutely.
And there was a women's Tour de France historically, and it didn't succeed due to lack of media
Promotion.
coverage and lack of commercial support.
Yeah.
We live in a different era now. We live in a different time. And we felt that if there was to be a women's race at the Tour de France, it would galvanize media support and it would elicit a lot more commercial kind of endorsement for women's cycling, and would be a self-fulfilling prophecy, because the more race opportunities you have, the more opportunities there are for the women to compete, to earn money, to get that commercial sponsorship. And then the more media coverage there is, the more companies are interested in supporting the sport. So it would be a virtuous circle. So what we decided to do was to lobby for a women's race at the Tour de France, which we were ultimately successful at. Obviously, having a race is, like I said, it's not a panacea. There's a huge disparity in prize money as well. There's a 10-day race, the Giro Rosa, that takes place in Italy at the same time as the Tour de France. And the winner of the Tour de France gets 450,000 euros for the win of the yellow jersey. The winner of the Giro Rosa, which was Marianne Vos this year, for 10 days of cycling, won 525 euros. So there's a huge disparity that doesn't necessarily exist in other sports. And so we just wanted to take steps to address that. And we thought also in providing those race opportunities for the women, that would then provide a trickle down and inspiring the
girls to know that there's
the next
a future.
Generation. And I also look to triathlon as it's not perfect. Of course it's not perfect, but it is a good example of
equal prize money across the board.
Equal opportunity, equal race opportunities, equal prize money, equal opportunities for media exposure and commercial endorsement. It's not perfect, and there are still challenges that are faced in this sport. But compared to cycling,
head and shoulders above it.
I think really we can be proud of what we've achieved in the sport right from its inception. When Paula was racing and knocking on the door at the top 10, and we saw the women, and the age groupers are able to race with the women and see what they can do. So that difference, that gender difference, just doesn't exist as much.
It used to be that especially nutrition companies would never use a woman as someone to try to sell nutrition products. It was that you had all the guys, and Paula was really one of the first. When she was the Next Nutrition or whatever company that was, she was sponsored because they felt that guys would buy product that a woman was endorsing because she was a great athlete, period. It didn't matter if she was a guy or a woman, she was a great athlete. So I think that the sport of triathlon has prided itself on having the equal opportunities across the board like that from us.
Yeah, I think what's interesting, having looked at this, the participation of women, especially U.S. compared to Europe, for example, whereas you see Rock and Roll Marathon and some of these events that have really
women.
brought a lot of women into sport. like you said, 60% of a field is women.
Yes.
U.S. triathlon, Ironman, 30%.
Right.
European Ironman, 10%. You know,
Right.
the growth potential in Europe right now
Huge.
is through the roof.
Yes.
So I really hope that, you know, we can start to move in that direction on a lot of these fronts. All right, so Hawaii.
Yes.
You have to get back to Hawaii.
yeah.
Oh, we're in Hawaii?
Yeah.
Again, I asked this question of Luke, and I love having someone like you who has so much background and knowledge about the sport. We asked him a lot. We asked him both on the men's and women's side, and I want to give you the opportunity to give us your picks for the men's and the women's side. And I know you have a lot of friends, and it's really difficult for a lot of, especially athletes and former athletes, to do this because they don't want to offend anybody. But let's just pretend that no one ever
Nobody's
has
watching.
watched this before,
Yeah.
and no one's going to.
Just between
the three of us.
We're in a
Yeah.
bar.
Okay.
Just
We're
give
in a
me,
bar,
just
yeah.
give me a ballpark on like the top 3 men and women. Just, you know, throw it out there.
I think everyone you interview is going to say that it's incredibly difficult to predict
Always.
on both sides. Sometimes there are, you know, standout contenders, and I think this year the strength and depth is just absolutely phenomenal, and that's on the women's side as much as
Absolutely.
the men's now. And I think we've seen that change over the course of the past, you know, 4 or 5 years. That the number of women that can contend for the victory.
Lots.
Really is more than I can count on one hand, if not two. On the women's side, I think Mirinda will be hard to beat.
Yeah.
I, however, do think that the strong bikers are really going to give her a very difficult, tough race. And by those, I mean Leander Cave. I mean, Leander Cave's come into form relatively late.
Yep.
Yeah.
But that's,
Good
you know,
time to
that's
come into form.
Yeah, absolutely. That's fantastic. And she knows what it takes to win. She knows what it feels like to win here. So I really do think that she's going to be one to watch out for. Rachel Joyce,
Yep.
too, very, very good friend of mine. Just so consistent across all three disciplines. And healthy. Jody,
Jody Swallow,
absolutely, will absolutely be in the mix, especially, you know, on the bike and in the early stages of the run, and hopefully she can back up or she can kind of continue at the back end of the marathon. Daniela Riff,
Yes.
of course, hasn't run over the marathon, I think, as fast as she probably is capable of this year.
Yeah.
But she bikes like an absolute animal, as we
You know
saw.
something about that.
Yeah.
So who's the Chrissie Wellington in this field? Because 2007, Huddle
When
and I
none
were
of us
sitting here
knew
going,
what was going on.
Yeah,
We're
we
like,
didn't want to bring that up again, but it's like, yeah.
who's
Chrissie
the
who?
dork in the swimsuit with the, you know, without a hat, just
Yeah, with
crushing
no
everyone
hat.
like
Who's
a
got
bug?
a piece of duct tape holding that one sponsor on?
$5 sunglasses that I bought from a gas station in New
Yes.
Zealand in
And you
2000.
borrowed the
Yeah.
racing kit from somebody else?
Yeah, that's just,
So
it's all-
who's in the
that's
field
all
that we
true.
know that we're not aware of that is going to surprise
Who just
people?
won Ironman Korea this year and,
Yeah.
and like in heat and humidity, and we're not looking for it.
I think Kareen could be one to watch. One to watch out for. I think Heather Wurtel. I don't think she's a dark horse,
No.
but I didn't mention her. Kat Morrison as well.
I'd like to see Kat have a
didn't
good
have the
here.
race that she wanted.
She really hasn't had the race she wanted here yet.
No.
What
and-
about Carolyn Steffen, who's been knocking on the door for...
See, I knew
I know.
I'd
but
forget
you know what? You know what's
someone,
funny?
and-
You've mentioned at least 5 names that, for example, Luke Van Leer didn't mention a lot
Yes.
of them. I'm just like
Yeah,
listening to
it's-
these names come. I'm going, oh my.
Yeah,
you know,
yeah.
you forget.
That's what's
you
so
know?
great is
Yeah.
how deep the field is.
Absolutely,
I
yeah.
love
Of
that.
course, I should have mentioned Caroline.
Yeah.
I think Maka would have given her the mental confidence as
Yes.
much
Yeah.
as the physical strength to be competitive.
Yeah.
Definitely, Lindsay Corbin.
Yeah, it's had
fantastic race in
Austria. Yeah. She went faster
Fantastic.
across
So there's at
PRs
least 10
across
right
the
now
board.
that are going to
Yeah.
win. Yeah.
Yeah, or
Caitlin's-
top 3.
Yeah. Caitlin Snow, she'll be
Mowing
running
through from the back.
running through the field like
Exactly.
she always does. On the men's side, wow, it's wide open.
It
Some of
really
the
is.
people that you may have predicted didn't necessarily have the
No.
seasons that might indicate that they've got the form. Rana, I think,
Yeah.
would be
Heard that a
strong.
lot.
I'm sure Freddie. I'm sure Luke would have got
Yes.
Freddie and
For Dano.
yeah, of course.
How you just talked about Freddie, and you know this from experience. How hard is it to repeat here? How hard is it to come like that first year, where you didn't have any of the media responsibilities? I mean, you know, you cruised in, you won, but then coming back, it's a different deal. Everybody wants to talk to you. You got interviews lined up the whole week. You can't just lie in your hotel room with your feet up.
You can, of course, there are additional obligations, but that's part of being a world champion.
Yes.
They're the responsibilities and the privileges that come with being world champion, being able to represent your sponsors, being supported by sponsors, having the opportunity to speak to the media. It just needs to be managed. I think it's important that athletes are able to say no, to prioritize and actually say, well, I can do this, this, and this, but that's where it ends. Because you can't accept every invitation and you can't do every appearance that's requested of you, and that's where a good support team comes into play. Of course, when you're racing, when they're racing on Saturday, it's them against the elements and the other competitors, of course, but in the run-up, your support team is so incredibly important, and I lent very heavily on my manager, Ben, and my friends and family to keep me grounded, but also to ensure that I wasn't overstretched.
Exactly.
In race week, but it is difficult.
Do you remember the difference in the feeling? Because it's obviously a very intense feeling, treading water, waiting in that last minute for the gun to go. But was there a dramatic difference from the first year you won as a relative unknown to the next year? Treading water, knowing the target's on your back and everybody's looking at you and wondering where you are and keeping an eye on you? Or did it matter? You're just like, goodbye.
It obviously felt different. No one expected more of me in 2008 than I expected of me. So I placed a lot of pressure on my own shoulders that I hadn't placed on my shoulders the year before. The year before, all I wanted to do was just go out and do my very, very best. And that didn't change in 2008. That's still the way I felt. But you're very cognizant of the fact that you are capable of winning that race. Exactly. And I wasn't aware of that in 2007. And I was acutely aware that, you never take that win for granted, but that you're very, very capable of winning, and it puts that additional pressure on. But I think when that gun goes off, that pressure almost dissipates, and it's, it's down to business. It's
back to reality.
Absolutely. And you're very much, you're very much in the moment. So I think the pressure that you feel is in the run-up in the days, even the week before. I think actually when you're treading water, that almost dissipates. And then you're getting to work.
Love it.
And you stay in the moment, every swim stroke, every pedal stroke, just getting the most
out of everything.
Out of yourself.
Chrissie, thank you so much for taking time.
Yeah, thanks for coming
Our
by.
4-time Ironman World Champion, undefeated, retiring at the very top of her game and doing great things for women in sport. Love it. Love everything you're doing.
I just want to say thanks for having me, and good luck to everyone for Saturday. Have an amazing race. I will be dashing around everywhere, cheering everyone on.
Well, hopefully you'll join us for a little radio if you get some time.
Yeah. I'll pop in.
Love it. Again.
Thank you.
This is Breakfast from Kona. My name is Bob Babbitt. His name is Paul Huddle. We are presented by Active, inspired to race, and our sponsors are Timex, Rudy Project, GoPro, MPA Graphics, Lava Magazine, and of course, Babbittville Radio. Poncho Man, take us out.
'Cause I can see her running from 1,000 miles, and heaven opens up every time she smiles. Watching breakfast with Bob. You're watching breakfast with Bob and Paul.
Poncho Man! Tied in Chrissie smiles. I like that.
Oh,
You're a legend.
We can just pack it.